Hello everybody. I'm finally have my lights set up and on my tripod out in front of me, and so we may do some interesting things over the next few days. You can see in the background some horses crossing a stream, a picture that Kamari painted not too long ago, not long before she passed away. She finished that. But it reminded me of a story of when I was 8 years old. I had a horse by the name of Booger. He was about 16 hands, a little over 16 hands tall, and just a solid chestnut horse. His mother was a little pony, and we never suspected that Booger would grow very big because his mother and dad both were small horses. But he never lacked for a bit of food his entire life, I don't think. And this particular story, Booger was my tricycle when I was younger. He was my bicycle. He was my motorcycle. He was my transportation. And I rode him everywhere. I didn't have any of those wheeled vehicles, and so I had a four-footed vehicle. But the reason this picture reminded me is when I was about 8 years old, we lived close to the South Canadian River, and I had ridden across the river to see a friend of mine that morning. And the river was only about 20 feet wide and maybe 8 inches deep as we crossed it. But that afternoon, when I was headed home, when I came to the river, it was a half a mile wide. And the main stream of it was probably 10 feet deep. There was a lot of the area out to where I was riding that was only about 5 foot deep, and that only came up to the middle of his belly, middle of his body. And Dad had told us stories when we were young about him riding across the river. And, and I thought, well, if Dad could do it, so can I. And so I knew that the river would wash me downstream a ways, and so I went upriver, 3/4 of a mile and maybe a half a mile. I kicked him off in it, and so the first 1/4 of a mile or so of this water was only up to the middle of his body, and he's walking on sand, and so we got across that pretty well. We got out to where the main flow of the river was coming from. It was deep, and there were trees that were 3 foot in diameter, big cottonwood trees that had washed out upstream, and they were coming down the river, and I didn't want to tangle with those, and so I'm standing there getting ready to go off into this deep water. The deep, real swift water was only maybe 100 yards wide, and but I looked upstream until I couldn't see any big timber coming, and I told him to go, and so off into the swimming water we went, and as we went across the river, it was really pushing us hard, and I'd have to slow him up sometimes to let trees go by, I learned that you didn't want to get close to a tree that had its branches downstream, because if its branches downstream, they would dig into the sand, and the trunk of that tree would come just like that over in the water. And so I learned that much while we were going. But anyway, the river was pushing us downstream, and we finally made it across. You know, no big deal, except it had washed me over 3 miles downriver. And then I had trouble getting through all of the fences and the farms and things to get around and get home. I could have ridden around and gone over the river bridge, but it would have taken me about 6 hours to have gotten home if I'd gone that way. The way it was, it took me about 6 hours to get home. Mother was not a happy camper. She was most put out that I had swum the river, but I was pretty proud of myself being able to do that. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk later.